Welcome to the Portable Classroom Max program. Passive voice. Today we're going to talk about the passive voice. First, we have to understand what is passive voice. The direct translation of passive voice is 被动语态. In Chinese, we have something similar as well, like 他被打. We emphasize on what happened to the person. 我们强调是发生在主词上的事情，而不是主词那个人做了什么事情。在中文里面，我们用被来表达被动语态。In English, we have a special voice called the passive voice to talk about pretty much the same thing. First, let's study the example. Somebody built this house in 1935. This is an active voice. You can see that somebody is a subject. He does the action. He built the house in 1935. This house was built by somebody in 1935. This is passive voice. We talk about what happened to the house. Now the house is the subject. In the active voice, it is the object. The person does something to the object. But in passive voice, we want to know what happens. What happens to the subject? So we put the house here, and we know it was built, 被建造. What happened to the house is that it was built by somebody in 1935. Okay, let's look at some examples over here. Active voice, we want to know what the subject does. So we always start with a subject that does the action. For example, like he painted the wall. So we know he actually does this action to the wall. But if we want to know what happened to the wall, we must then move the object of the original sentence to the front so that the word wall can be an subject if we want to know what happened to the wall. So in passive voice, no longer do we emphasize on what the subject does, we emphasize on what happens to the subject. So we can do something to the original sentence, rewrite it in the passive voice. We say the wall was painted by him. So in passive voice, we know what happened to the wall. What happened to the wall was that it was painted. 主动语态跟被动语态最大的差异在于，主动语态强调是主词，就是做动作人到底做了什么动作，而被动语态是想要知道主词发生了什么事，也就是被做了什么动作。And study the two examples, you noticed what is the form of the passive voice. First of all, we switch the position of the object and the subject. So in the first sentence, when it's written in the active voice, the wall is the object. But in the passive voice, the wall is the subject because we want to know what happened to the wall. And then the he in the active voice is the subject, but in a passive voice, it was the object. And you notice the change of verb. One additional thing has been added. It is the be verb. So the form of the passive voice is be verb with verb past participle. In passive voice, we need to use be verb and verb past participle. This is how we let people know that this sentence is written in passive voice. Okay, let's look at more example. For example, the first. For example, the first, let's look over here. Tom broke the glass. You know this is an active voice. So Tom is the person who broke the glass. He did this to the glass. This is an active voice. Let's just say it is active voice. Let's rewrite this sentence into passive voice by moving the glass to the front. So let's move the glass to the front because we want to know what happened to the glass. The glass used be verb And because it's past tense, so the be verb should be was. Verb PP of broke, break, broke, broken. Broken. By, we always use by with the person who did that. By Tom. This is passive voice. So in passive voice, we say the glass was broken by Tom. In the first sentence, when it's written in an active voice, we want to know what the subject did to the glass, what Tom did to the glass. When we rewrite the sentence in the passive voice, we want to know what happened to the glass. It was broken by Tom. Let's look at the second example over here. All right. Mary will invite us. This is written in the active voice. All right. And then if I change it to passive voice, we want to know what happened to us. We can say we will be invited because it's future tense, and this is the be verb of future tense. Verb PP invite, invited. We will be invited by Mary. And this is the passive voice. So in sentence number 1, we want to know what Mary will do. So we use active voice. Mary will invite us. And in the second one, we want to know what will happen to us. So we use we as the subject. We will be invited by Mary. So you can see that the form of the passive voice is always the be verb with verb past participle. Be verb with verb past participle. All right. And remember, active voice, we want to know what the subject does. In passive voice, we want to know what happens to the subject. Let's go back to our lesson plan. English has two voices. Active, that's the one that we normally use. And the passive, when we use the active voice, we say what subject does. As in the first sentence in example, like this, somebody built this house. What subject does? What subject did to the house? The active voice stresses, means emphasize, 强调, the doer, the person who does the action. And example number 1 is that somebody of the action. When we use the passive voice, we say what happens to the object. As in the second sentence in example, like the second sentence, we want to know what happened to the house. It was built. So the passive voice stresses, emphasizes the receiver of the action. 它是强调原本动作的接受者. You can see that the house is actually in an active voice. It's the object, because we want to know what happened to the subject. So we put the object to the front as an subject and to learn what actually happens to it. Okay? Active voice 是主动语态，一般由人或其他有动作能力的主词带头的句子。Passive voice 是被动语态，意即由无法有动作能力的名词带头。这些名词通常是主词中的受词。Alright, let's look at more examples. Active voice, my grandfather was a builder. He built this house in 1935. Passive voice, this house is quite old. It was built. You can see that. We want to know what happened to the house in 1935. Second sentence for the active voice. It is a big company. It employs 200 people. It means the company. The company employs 200 people. And then if we want to do rewrite the sentence in passive voice, we'll move the 200 people to the front because we want to know what happens to this 200 people. So passive voice, 200 people are employed by the company. So by starting in the above example, just like what we talked about, we know that we have to use be verb with verb past participle in the passive voice. Now the most important question is, when do we use the passive voice? We use the passive voice in the following situations. We use the passive voice when, number 1, we want to stress what happens to the subject, like in this example. We want to know what happened to the house. So we say it was built in 1935. Who built it is not important. 建造的人不重要的时候 I just want to know what happened to the house. Who built it is not very important. So I use the passive voice. Number 2, who or what causes the action is often unknown or unimportant. Just like the first case I said, who built the house is unimportant. Or like the example over here, a lot of money was stolen in the robbery. Who stole the money? It's unknown. I don't know who stole it. Someone stole it, but we don't know who. And that's when we use the passive voice. A lot of money was stolen in a robbery, but we don't know who stole it. So we use the passive voice. Is this room cleaned every day? Does someone clean it? It is not important who. Who cleans the room is not important. What's important to me is that is this room cleaned every day? So I want to know what happens to the room. Who cleans the room is not important. So who or what causes the action is often unknown, 不知道, or unimportant, 不重要. Number 3, if we want to say who does or what causes the action, we use by with an object. 我们需要知道做这个事情的人的时候 who actually does it, we use by with an object. Like, this house is built by my grandfather. So I know actually this house is built by no other people but my grandfather. I use by with the person who does the action. This book is written by John. So actually, John wrote the book. And these are the 3 situations that we use the passive voice. Keep them in mind. And then later, we'll talk about using passive voice in different tenses. Thank you for watching this.